they said, well, for us to make these changes, what we're going to have to do is we have to employ people to make changes to the website. We're going to have to redo the whole infrastructure of the site, basically pull in new services, and go through every single site template, which they said was a couple of hundred site templates, and make changes to all of those templates. They estimated that it would cost them $2.2 million Australian dollars to make the changes across the site. Okay, that's what they said. So we can't make these adjustments reasonably because this is an amount of money that we are not prepared to spend to make the site accessible. What the Australian courts did and what Bruce McGuire did is they brought in experts from the W3C and a university in the US. I don't remember the exact one right now. But basically the expert witnesses disproved their argument of unreasonable costs. They basically said, right, to make this site accessible, you could do it in literally 4 weeks. Hire one person, make no changes to the infrastructure, and you could do it in 4 weeks. And they cited, for the first time ever, the W3C's, the World Wide Web Consortium's guidelines for accessibility. Now these guidelines, this is back in 1999, 2000, these guidelines only came out in 1999, so they were very, very new guidelines, and basically the court said, right, looking at these guidelines, listening to what the experts have to say, yes, you can make these changes to the website in literally 4 weeks. And they still, at that point, said, we're not going to make changes to the site. So what they did is they basically eventually got to the point where they had to pay Bruce McGuire a fee for undue hardship. That fee was $20,000 US. Once they had paid out that fee, they eventually did make changes to the site. The site was only going to be there for probably a couple of years until the next Olympics came out again, but they did pay the fee and they eventually made changes to the site. Okay, this is probably going to be the same structure of case that will be followed in the UK when it eventually does get settled through the courts, directly through the courts. A prosecution occurs, rather than it being settled out of court, which is what's currently happening. Okay.
You know, you said 3 slides ago
that
it was objective. Did you mean subjective? Or is this made it objective?
It's a very much objective term. To every business, one person could look at a business and say, well, that's a reasonable requirement, and someone else could say something totally different, say it's not.
It's subjective.
Really?
They're trying to be more objective through that process, but generally, at the moment, it's subjective because it all depends on your point of view.
No, you mean it's subjective in the sense it relates to the size of the firm. So what might be reasonable to ask a very large firm to do would not be reasonable to ask a very small firm.
Yeah, so it's an objective term, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it is. In that sense it is, yeah.
Yeah. No?
Not
yes?
you, are you, then?
Anyway, hey, I'm foreign. That's my excuse.
Yeah.
There are no cases in the UK. There are a lot of cases. Well, there are a few cases in the US as well. So obviously in the US they're quite happy to sue anyone, and there are a couple of successful cases. If you look at, for example, Target.com, they recently there was a case successful in the courts against them as well, and they paid out similar fees to a number of different users across the US. Okay, for us in the UK, the Disability Rights Commission, DRC, which is the one that Nick was mentioning earlier, they have done a couple of studies. There is documentation out there for you. One of the documents you can get your hands on is a document called PAS 78, which is going to be soon superseded by a new document. But this document is currently out there, and it's a document that you have to buy. Okay, it costs £30 to buy the document, but what you, as web developers and web designers and businesses working with the web, can do is actually use this document as a way of basically educating your customers. You can say to your customers, say, right, if you're interested in web accessibility, we want to be able to provide you with web accessibility. Here is a document that you can go out and buy, or you can provide it to them as a free service. Cost you £30, but it's a document that's written in reasonably plain English about accessibility, the kinds of things that somebody who's commissioning a website would need to know about accessibility. So not from the developer's point of view, So not from a techie's point of view, but from a basic business point of view, what are the things that are important about accessibility? What are the key things in accessibility? And if you've read through this document, you'll know, for example, how important CSS is, how potentially things like content management systems, old e-commerce systems, how potentially those could be inaccessible. Tables and cells designs, how bad that is. One of the things this document also does push out is that one of the types of people you should never trust is somebody who says that they can build you an accessible website. Building an accessible website, well, is literally impossible. There's always be some caveat, some disability, some kind of technology that won't be able to access a certain part of any website. So promises like that can be a little bit misleading. So this document kind of pushes you in that direction. Okay, for us, if you are interested as a developer in developing an accessible site, one of the places you want to go look for some guidelines is the W3C's website. They do have an entire section called the WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative. It's part of the W3C. And they have some guidelines, documents that have come out to basically guide you in creating accessible websites. Basic things like, for example, creating alternative text for your images, creating alternative text for your video and audio content, and basically some guidelines for you to follow. The first version of a document that's probably the most interesting for us is this Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The first version of it came out in 1999. The latest version came out in December 2008, which is the version 2. I've used both. I actually found the first version of the document a lot easier to work with than the second version of the document. But we do, on the course, we go through we use the second version of the document.
What would be the immediate benefit to a small to medium business owner reading such a
Nothing. Nothing, which is why I started off by mentioning that the PAS 78 document would probably be
probably
more relevant to a business.
I've not read any of them because, frankly, anything that's got W3C anywhere near it is unnecessarily legally vague and
it's supposed to be.
Such a high level, but
yes.
It almost cannot make sense to an individual.
Yeah, definitely. This document here, well, yes, this document here, the PAS 78 document, is written in layman's terms. It's very much an easy document to read. These documents here are very, very technical and written in such a way that they are totally neutral to everything, okay?
It's incredibly difficult to interpret.
Yes.
Generic.
Definitely. And that's exactly on the course, what I say to people is, right, we're going to go through some of these guidelines. We're not going into them too deeply, but if you read any of them, they make absolutely no sense to anything. Unless you look at them in context, you say, right, I'm looking at this from a point of view of, let's say, for example, just making images accessible and try to read through it, it tends to make vague sense. But it doesn't really apply to any certain technology, doesn't tend to apply to any types of software or anything like that. So, yeah, it's reasonably vague. But it is supposed to be very, very technology neutral. So it could mean, which is one of the problems with it. It actually comes down to, it actually gets misinterpreted a lot. So there are better documents than this to look at. But this is, at the moment, one of the documents the courts are looking at and saying, right, these are the checkpoints, these are the guidelines that you should be looking at.